What's up, everybody? I am back for another Meta Monday. I said I would be back, and I am back. Uh, Someone actually sent me a message saying, "Hey, are you doing a Meta Monday?" And my initial reaction was, "Monday? It's a holiday. It's Labor Day or whatever day it is." So yeah, it just threw me off, and I didn't know it was today was Monday. It is Monday, right? Like I'm checking the calendar. Yeah, it's Monday. Okay, cool. I was 99% sure. All right, so today you can see that I already got a video up, ready to review. I am going to critique every single video arguing for moral realism on the entire internet eventually, if I do enough of these. What is that? 52 Meta Mondays a year. If I don't miss a day, I will be missing days. I just missed several months. So, all right. Last time I didn't talk to anybody. Maybe people didn't know I was back. So I already see we got some answers to the questions. I'm not keeping track right now, but I'm just going to get into the habit following Nathan. But Travis is the first to respond. So Travis gets what, 1,000 units of lance loot. You get 1,000 lance loot. Supercritical Snake says no and gets 500 lance loot. So if there's Nathan Nichols, there's got to be lance loot. All right. And so how are you all doing? So I was gone for a long time. I think the last couple videos, because I streamed twice last week, I just kind of just got into the material and didn't talk about what's up and what's going on. You might see that I'm in a new location. I'm not fully set up yet. So there's still things are in flux and not everything is where I need it to be. So I'm still getting set up. So I moved. I started a new job. I might as well just tell you. So I started a job as a lecturer at Cornell. I will be teaching psychology courses, and I'm pretty excited about it. So this is where I did my PhD. In a certain sense, I'm kind of back home. I've lived in quite a few homes. I was in the Boston area when I was at Tufts doing my master's for philosophy. I don't know if I ever talked that much about all this stuff. So whatever, let's talk about a little bit of a, let's talk, okay, whatever. So I was born in Alabama, actually. My dad moved the family there for work. I was there until I was 3 or so. I'm not exactly sure how old I was. I think I was 3. And we moved out. So I don't have much of a memory of being in Alabama. But yeah, technically born in Alabama, lived in New Jersey for a few years. And then I moved, I think I was right about to turn 7. So I think I was 6. I moved down to South Florida, Fort Lauderdale. And that's where I grew up. That's where I did my undergrad. That's where my formative years were in South Florida with the heat and alligators and Florida man news stories of people doing bizarre things. So yeah, that's where the action was. I went up to the Boston area, technically like Medford and Somerville or whatever their names are. Man, I'm not just saying that. I'm actually losing track of the names of places that I was in. Medford for sure. Medford, yeah. So anyway, so I went to Tufts. Then I moved around a little bit, but I ended up in Ithaca where I started on my PhD and moved away for a few years. Now I'm back. So that's where I'm at. So yeah, I think I went to, for a while, I was kind of like, I don't know, just not talking much about what was going on. Like I do know I mentioned that I finished up the PhD a couple of years ago. I don't know why. I became a bit of a dissertation recluse, and that's starting to fade away as I get a little more comfortable talking about stuff. And yeah, so if you got questions about everything going on, do feel free to ask. So yeah, I do see some congrats here, so thank you. I do see other people answering that. So Leo, you're the last one in for the Lance loot. So I guess what should I give you? 250. We got other people answering no to the initial question. Yeah, see, it's a little clickbaity, right? Is moral realism almost certainly true? But it is actually based on the title of the video that I'm going to be reviewing. Let me see some congrats here. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ain't much to remember about Alabama. I don't have any. I don't know. I don't remember Alabama. I'm not gonna diss it. I could say lots of negative things about Florida. Actually, I could say quite a few positive things about my own experience there. And at least I was like right near the beach. That's cool. Got to pop down to the Keys. We got a lot of good restaurants. So yeah, there's some perks. And most of my family is still down there. So, or at least in Florida. So yeah. But yeah, now back in New York. All right. So if you got questions and stuff, I'll try to be a little more interactive with the audience than I was the last couple times, just sort of getting back into the swing of things. So I'm happy to address questions. And it doesn't have to be about the video. You could ask just general questions about, what I'm doing on the channel and everything. I should mention, by the way, for people, most people here probably aren't new, but I do have a blog called Lance Independent as well. Check it out. I've got a very long series there critiquing a case for moral realism from a couple of years ago from Bentham's newsletter. That's ongoing. I got another one coming out where I actually went ahead. A lot of times I critique stuff people say on YouTube or on Twitter or sort of like popular presentations of meta ethics, even if it's from academics, because academics will pop up on TikTok and Twitter and stuff, and I'll critique what academics say, what non-academics say, that sort of thing. But I do have an upcoming one where I'm critiquing the text right out of a book, where I do think that the author does not do a great job of representing relativist positions in there. Now, I am a moral anti-realist and not a relativist, but I guess sometimes I feel like I have to defend my anti-realist brethren, relativism, error theory, and expressivism, even though I don't endorse any of those views. So yeah, so let's get into this video. You'll see I skipped about a minute ahead. They just give a characterization of what moral realism is, and they do a great job of it. I just didn't want to waste a minute covering that. If you don't know what moral realism is, you're in the wrong place at this point. I'm not going to give those rundowns I used to give where I'd give a 30-minute sort of little intro on metaethics. Go check out one of my older videos, or better yet, if you don't know what it is, I mean, the glib thing to say is Google it, but Kane B has an excellent channel that has a whole series on metaethics and covers it in unnecessary amounts of detail, like different metaethical positions. So Kane B's channel is more like just direct injection of knowledge in your mind. I should also say it's getting a bit late for me. I'm waking up earlier now because I teach classes pretty early in the morning, and it's just become more of a habit. I used to be more of a late night person, but those days are over. Okay, so let's get into it. Hopefully the volume is okay on this.
When I say that moral realism is almost certainly true, what I'm
Let me know if the volume is an issue for anybody, and I may adjust it. It seems fine on my end.
Saying is, I cannot prove to you beyond all possible doubt that moral realism is true. I can prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that moral realism is true, but it's always possible that we've gotten some evidence wrong or we're being deceived in some systematic way. So the fact that evolution could possibly be misguided doesn't give us any reason not to study and perform research on evolution in the biology departments of the best universities in the world. It's the best confirmed theory in biology. Similarly, the fact that moral realism could possibly be false doesn't give us great reason to doubt its truth. And in fact, this is one of the very few things that most philosophers agree on, that moral realism is almost certainly true.
So a couple things to say about that. Notice the remark was most philosophers agree that moral realism is almost certainly true. Not really. So if you look at the 2020 Phil paper survey, that's the main place we're going to get data for that. When was this? Was this before 2020? 6 years ago. It was. So at the time, the only survey that would have been available would be the 2009 Phil paper survey, which had something like 56% of philosophers endorsing moral realism. That's like, technically that's most endorsing moral realism, but note that that's most that responded to that survey. So that survey is primarily reaching philosophers in the Anglophone world, and it's predominantly reaching philosophers working in the analytic tradition. I don't know the relative proportion of philosophers that work in the analytic tradition, in the continental tradition, and in the various other traditions around the world. There's Eastern philosophies, there's various types of philosophies, and I don't know what proportion, I don't know the total number that would work in those areas. Some people work in multiple areas, and I don't know what you would get if you surveyed all of them. The number might go up in some cases, it might go down in some cases. My guess is overall it would go down. I doubt as many continental philosophers endorse moral realism, although they may not endorse anti-realism either. They might think that That's a goofy analytic dispute, which maybe I would agree with them. Maybe for different reasons than continental philosophers are inclined to think that. But the point here is that there's a big difference between saying most philosophers think such and such and most philosophers that responded to the 2020 or the 2009 Phil paper survey. Those are different. And while it may be a pretty okay approximation, when you're in the 50s and 60s, in terms of your percentages, it's iffy whether if you really surveyed everybody that represented philosophy, whether it would stay on one or the other side of that 50-50. If it was 95 or 5, maybe you could say, yeah, even if we added everybody else, it's probably not going to shift too much. So that's the first point, that most of them think such and such. It's a little murky. I mean, it's like technically true of analytic philosophers, but the other problem is that when you look at that survey, in fact, I could just pop open the survey. Let's do it. And I'm going to shift to the 2020 Phil paper survey rather than the 2009. The number did actually go up for this. So the number of moral realists, like people that endorse moral realism, went up to 62%. So let's go to this one. I don't like how it displays it there. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. All right, so as you can see here, I'm going to zoom in a bit on it. You can see that moral realism, notice what it says, accept or lean towards. And then it has accept or lean towards anti-realism, and then you get about 13%, a little less, endorsing something other than one of those two positions. It looks like, just from eyeballing it, maybe about a third are lean towards rather than accept, unless I got that flipped around. I think, yeah, accept, yeah, 24. So no, only 37.35% accept moral realism. You have another about 25% that lean towards it. Now, notice the remark that is made in the video. So let's go back to the video.
So I'm reason to doubt its truth. And in fact, this is one of the very few things that most philosophers agree on.
Now, ask yourself, if we have data showing that about 37, 38% of philosophers accept moral realism and about 25% lean towards it, is that good evidence that most consider moral realism almost certainly true? No, it's not. Because if a huge chunk of them, if more than a third of them only lean towards moral realism, someone that leans towards something that doesn't outright accept it is not someone that thinks it's almost certainly true. At least that's pretty darn implausible. And so what we might be dealing with is barely more than a third of them consider it almost certainly true. And this is assuming, like, sort of best case scenario, that this is a representative sample. I mean, maybe the number would go up, but it matters. If you say most people think it's almost certainly true, that's quite a bit different from overall, if you aggregate analytic philosophers that accept or lean towards moral realism, it's a little bit more than half. That's what we're actually dealing with. Precision matters here. It's not that big of a deal, but it does bother me at least a little bit when people say stuff like this, because they have every opportunity to be exceptionally precise in what they say, and they lean a little bit into exaggeration when they make remarks like this, unless this claim is based on something other than the 2020 Phil paper survey or the 2000, well, it can't be, maybe 2009. In which case, what is it based on? Because if it's not based on survey data, if it's based on anecdotes or something else, then we're talking about weak evidence of a too strong of a claim. And I'm not a huge fan on that. I'm not a huge fan of that, like phrasing things that way. Don't exaggerate if you don't have to. Okay. Someone asks, congrats on the job, hopefully full-time position. It is a full-time position. Yeah, it's a good deal. All right, let's keep going.
That moral realism is almost certainly true. So I'm not just teaching you something that I think, I'm teaching you something that there's a consensus about within philosophy.
Okay, consensus. Again, 62% accept or lean towards it. That is not a consensus. That's not by any conventional use of the term consensus. there is not a consensus in favor of moral realism. So if you look at the actual data, note that that 62%. If you break down what positions they hold, what you see is about 1/3 of philosophers endorse non-naturalist realism. Sorry, I should say it's about a quarter. Let's just go with a third because there's a few that fall into other, but roughly a third endorse, well, actually, really, it's like a quarter. Let's just look at the specific data. Just like I was just talking about specificity, why not be specific? Give me one moment to find where they talk about. Here we go. Yeah, that's better. I like being specific. Where is the search? Ah, there it is. Okay. Check this out. Okay, so as you can see here, if you look, I'll zoom in again. That's too much. All right, as you can see, it's actually, one second. Yeah, you can see that a little over a quarter endorse non-naturalist realism, not quite a third endorse naturalist realism, and then you have several that fall into these various anti-realist positions. They didn't put relativism on here. I'm assuming relativists might favor some type of constructivism. Then you have expressivism and error theory. So if you aggregate these, then some of those probably wouldn't consider themselves anti-realists. You actually get it something like 25% would call themselves anti-realists. So we could say a quarter endorse anti-realism. And then you have about a third endorsing naturalist realism and about a quarter endorsing non-naturalist realism. So that's the actual spread. And here's the reason that that's important. And I do have blog articles where I talk about this, where I basically say, look, this is a lot closer to a case of rock, paper, scissors than it is to a dichotomy. And the reason for that is that non-naturalist moral realism is so different from naturalist realism that in many ways, naturalist realism is more like anti-realism. I mean, I literally don't even typically say naturalist realist accounts are false. I tend to say that they are trivial. So they're like, they just are not doing most of the things that a non-naturalist account is trying to achieve. And in that respect, the naturalist and the anti-realist would say many of the same things and raise many of the same objections to realism as one another. Likewise, naturalists, non-naturalists and anti-realists would raise many of the same objections to naturalist realism, like that it's trivial. That is an objection in the literature. You could check out the SCP, and it talks about the triviality objection. Basically, part of the issue there is that if you're a naturalist and you reduce all stance-independent moral facts to descriptive claims, you reduce or eliminate the irreducible normativity, the authoritativeness, the sort of practical power oomph that is associated with irreducibly normative moral facts. So you sort of, you throw out the baby with the bathwater, in other words. So that's a huge issue for non-naturalists. And a lot of anti-realists would say, yeah, naturalism just doesn't do what I want to get out of a realist position if I were to accept one. So, what you have are both positions lock arms in rejecting naturalism, but then, anti-realists and naturalists lock arms in rejecting non-naturalism. They might appeal to similar arguments, but of course, naturalists and non-naturalists lock arms in rejecting anti-realism. And so you have a situation that's more like a three-way battle, like a rock, paper, scissors, than it is like a true dichotomy. And as a result, it's actually kind of misleading to say most philosophers are realists. So there's a consensus. There's a consensus on what? That there's stance-independent moral facts, but it's about evenly split between views that are so radically different from one another. They're more different in one another in some ways than naturalist realism is from anti-realism. That's a weird way to split things up. And I don't endorse that way of splitting things up. I endorse being precise and showing, no, this actually splits up in multiple ways. And the ways in which it splits up don't really favor many of the sort of conventional realist positions that people will push. So a lot of times, for instance, non-naturalist realists will say there's a consensus in favor of realism as if it's a consensus in favor of their view. But note that non-naturalist realism is about a quarter, and so is anti-realism. Anti-realism is, I think, 26.1%, and non-naturalist realism is 26.6%, a little less than that. So they're marginally different. They're off by about 0.5%. So when non-naturalist realists act like they have some huge majority over anti-realists, it's literally not true. It's just not true. They're not any substantially more numerous than anti-realists are. They have they've got like 10 more people on the survey. I mean, it's silly for them to act like their position is in the majority. So be specific, and you'll see that these statistics and numbers are a little misleading. And no, this is after increasing the numbers from when that video was posted. Oh, right. Let's check the chat, see what people are saying about that. Yeah, so Mahiana's Mind says 25 to 30% of philosophers disagreeing with each other is not most philosophers agree. Yeah, this is not a case of there being a consensus. And, again, 62%, like, I don't know, if I look up the word consensus, what am I going to get? General agreement. I mean, that's a little vague on the number. I take consensus to have some sort of connotation that it's relatively well established, or most people have sort of settled on an answer. I think if you're dealing with something like a three-way split that's about even, or you're dealing with something like 60-ish, 25-ish, I wouldn't call that a consensus. I mean, there's not going to be a bright dividing line. I see someone saying, maybe 80%. But yeah, I don't think 62%, a questionable 62%, where it's lots of people leaning, people endorsing very different positions from one another. Are we really going to call that a consensus? I wouldn't call that a consensus. Why not just say a firm majority? I'll accept firm. I wouldn't say an overwhelming majority, but a firm majority. Because if it was 52, I wouldn't say that's a firm majority. But 62, that's a pretty firm majority. So why not firm majority? Or why not just majority? Or why not just say 62% or most? Most is like technically accurate. There's these minor exaggerations, I think, can give the impression that more people endorse realism than is in fact the case. Okay, I'm belaboring the point. Let's get back to it.
We'll talk about 2 bad arguments against moral realism and 7 good arguments in favor of moral realism. An argument within philosophy or logic or mathematics is not the same thing as arguing or having an argument out there in the world. If you have an argument with somebody out there in the world, you and that other person are yelling at each other, and maybe you're not going to be BFF anymore. If you are giving an argument in philosophy, then you are presenting a series of sentences that, when taken together, are supposed to be good evidence in favor of the truth of some other sentence. The sentences that are supposed to be evidence are known as the premises of the argument, and the sentence that those premises are supposed to be evidence for is known as the conclusion. So arguments have 2 parts: premises, which are the evidence; conclusion, which is the thing that evidence is supposed to be evidence for. And yelling at each other doesn't work very well if you're presenting an argument in philosophy. You shouldn't think that since the word is shared between out there and in here, that it means the same thing. Here's the first argument that is against the truth of moral realism. So it denies that. It denies the position that there are at least some facts about what matters. 2 premises and the conclusion. First premise: people have beliefs about morality. True. Obviously true. I have beliefs about morality, so do all of you. Beliefs about what's good and bad, right and wrong, better and worse, just and unjust, fair and unfair. But, says premise 2, if somebody has a belief about something, X, then X, that thing that they have a belief about, is merely subjective or doesn't exist at all. Therefore, premises 1 and 2 together entail the conclusion: morality is merely subjective or doesn't exist at all. Another way of saying that is moral realism is.
Well, the first thing to say is I completely agree this is a phenomenally bad argument. I've never heard someone make quite this argument. I have heard things kind of similar to this, but it strikes me as the sort of thing that you might encounter from someone that's very unfamiliar with the topic and has just encountered it. I do think it's worth addressing bad arguments, especially if they are popularly represented in sort of public discourse, or they come up in classrooms a lot, that sort of thing. When that occurs, I would probably intentionally flag it as such and not present this without context. Like, is this supposed to be an argument anti-realists generally give in the literature? Is this an argument that people that don't understand the terms and concepts or what's philosophically at stake tend to give? I mean, this is the latter. So I would probably say that, because if you don't, it might give at least some people the impression that you're taking on like serious anti-realist arguments when there's nothing serious about this. This is a ridiculous argument.
False. This is not a great argument. To see why, let's take the form of that argument, the structure of it, out of the topic of morality and apply it to other things and see if it's good. So let's apply it to dogs. Premise 1, people have beliefs about dogs. Premise 2, if somebody has a belief about something, then that thing is merely subjective or doesn't exist. Conclusion, dogs are merely subjective or don't exist. No, dogs do exist. The beliefs about dogs are subjective, but the dogs themselves are not. So put this way, this argument sounds bizarre, but we oftentimes hear people out there in the world say something like, well, you believe that, but that is merely your belief, or it's merely...
Yeah, fair enough. I see where he's coming from here. And people do say stuff like that. People will say, well, that's just your belief, and that sort of thing. Often I don't know if it rises to the level of a serious or formal argument, but if you try to extract an argument from it, it does probably actually look something like this. People, I think, sometimes seem to think that they're using a conception of subjective, which means something like a belief held from a sort of first-person perspective, but they're mixing up our beliefs being held from a perspective and what those beliefs are about. So if I believe there's a tree over there, even if we want to say my belief about the tree is like subjective, it doesn't mean the existence of the tree is subjective. And I think people might mix those up or conflate things, or maybe actually genuinely hold weird views about the relation between beliefs and reality. Any number of things is possible. And I do run into this, online and in discussions with people. But again, it's usually people that don't really have substantive knowledge of the field. So if the goal here is to critique sort of common misunderstandings, I don't see any issue with this. I'm fine with this.
Subjective, or that doesn't correspond with reality or something like that. The mere fact that somebody believes something does not mean that what they believe that thing about doesn't exist. Might not. We have beliefs about things that don't exist, like beliefs about unicorns and Santa. But we have beliefs about things that do exist, like Colorado and people who dress up like Santa at malls. Argument 2, and you'll see that this is a similar sort of confusion. Premise 1, we disagree about what matters. True. We have big disagreements and small disagreements. We fight wars or lose friends or stop talking for a night over disagreements. It's obvious that we disagree about what matters. But, says premise 2, if we disagree about something, then there are no facts about that thing. Therefore, the conclusion is there are no facts about what matters, that is, nothing matters.
Yeah, again, this actually, there are formal versions of this, like the argument from disagreement. They're usually not quite this straightforward or silly. And it would be kind of weird to endorse like a really hardcore deductive argument that's something like, if anybody disagrees about this at all, then there's no objective fact of the matter about it. Typically with these arguments, if someone's going to be serious about them, is going to try to do is they're going to try to make some sort of, it might be an inductive argument. They might be making an epistemic point that, or maybe it's an abductive argument. They might just be saying something like, look, the best explanation for the persistence of seemingly irreconcilable moral disagreements is that there's nothing to resolve because there isn't a fact of the matter. Or they might say, repeated encounters with people consistently yields evidence that people seem to have fundamentally different moral values and commitments. And then you would add some additional considerations and constraints onto it. So if you pointed to a group of people that don't have a lot of information and you find that they disagree, then it'd be kind of weird to say, therefore, there's no fact of the matter, because you might assume that if they had more information, they would converge on an answer. But if you have a bunch of people that you would say are epistemic peers, they are equally good at reasoning or thinking about a given matter, and they maintain a disagreement in spite of employing good methods and having all seemingly relevant available information, and they still disagree. Now that calls for an explanation that you can't just point to saying something like, well, they just haven't found out, they haven't, come across the right evidence. Well, no, they have all the available evidence. Well, they're not good at reasoning. No, we've already ruled that out. They actually are good at reasoning, and yet they persist in disagreement. Something about epistemic peers, or something about the persistence of disagreement under particular sorts of conditions will be, some evidence perhaps that there isn't some sort of singular fact of the matter to discover. And that might be leveraged as an argument against realism. It's not a very strong argument. There might be, comparatively stronger versions of it. But, this is another case, like many cases, where the arguments for a position are often going to be a cumulative case. And, I really doubt any philosophers is just like, yep, disagreement just settles the matter decisively. So, maybe there's a few people who think that. You always find philosophers that think something. But I doubt most anti-realists would think even the best arguments from disagreement are individually decisive, like they're just positive all on their own. They would take it to be part of a broader case. So I think this is both a weak version of this is a silly version of the argument. And so basically, I think that there are better versions of this argument, and they're a lot more modest in what they try to achieve. So in other words, the arguments are better in the sense that the content of the argument is more compelling than what's being stated here. And the conclusions are far more modest. They don't try to prove once and for all moral realism is wrong. And they rely on, basically, they got stronger premises, weaker conclusions. That makes sense.
Again, not a great argument. To see why, do the same thing. Copy the argument's form onto something other than morality. So let's talk about God. We disagree about whether God exists.
Yep. We get the idea here.
If we disagree about something, then there are no facts about that thing. Therefore, no, that doesn't sound right. If we disagree about something, then there are no facts about that thing. Therefore, there are no facts about which interpretation of quantum mechanics is correct. That is, no.
Well, hold on.
If we disagree about something, then there are no correct.
There could be cases where the answers are indeterminate, like people are asking confused metaphysical questions. So maybe there would be no answer in some cases. I don't know specifically about quantum mechanics, but sometimes the interpretations of a theory might all just be equally consistent with the data, and there's nothing dispositive that would settle the matter one way or another. That might mean there's a fact of the matter and we just don't know what it is, or we lack access to it. It might be that there's misconceptions. There might not be a correct theoretical interpretation. Again, I'm not trying to push this specifically for quantum mechanics, but I'm open to the possibility of certain types of indeterminacy with respect to certain kinds of questions. So I don't really take an issue with that in general, not in this specific case.
That doesn't follow.
Sorry to skip ahead. I don't want to waste your time with examples when we get the idea, and I don't think it's particularly helpful for us.
Hello? Just because we disagree about something, that doesn't mean that there are no truths about that thing. So both of those arguments seem to confuse what's going on in people's heads with what's going on in reality. But beliefs are not the things that the beliefs are about. My belief about a dog is not a dog. My belief about morality is not morality. And similarly, conflicting beliefs about something doesn't show that there's any problem with morality. It shows that we have conflicting beliefs about something. Big deal. We should try to sort it out. Now let's look at 7 good arguments for moral realism. And 7's a lot, but the reason that I'm giving you 7, in addition to that I like all of these arguments, is that they all trade on or work because of a similar thing about us, or about how we interact with each other, or about how we move around reality. So you'll see these are all coming at the same issue from different angles. I'm trying to illuminate something about all of us, and I'm doing it from these different directions. Let's look first at the 2 arguments that correspond to the negative arguments. The first is what I call the positive argument from disagreement for moral realism. Premise 1, we disagree about what matters. Yes, we do. 2, disagreement presupposes something to disagree over. Let's give an example. Imagine that 2 people were disagreeing about whether God exists. And you said, hey, do you think there's a fact of the matter about whether God exists? He either does or doesn't. They said, no. It's unclear what they're doing when they're disagreeing. If I say God exists and you say God doesn't exist, then our disagreement with each other presupposes that there's a fact of the matter about whether he does or doesn't exist. So a presupposition of disagreement is that there's something to disagree over. Imagine me saying, I was disagreeing last night with a friend about whether it was Tuesday night or Wednesday night, but there's no fact of the matter about what night it is. So what the hell were you?
This is a little strange for a couple reasons. First, note that the specific wording here, disagreement presupposes something to disagree over. One can grant that even if one is an anti-realist. What specifically you would need to do to show that, to present this as an argument for moral realism, would be to show in the second premise that disagreement presupposes disagreement over the stance-independent moral facts. In other words, it would need to somehow imply, if this is in a general form, you would say something like, actually, this is already in a moral context, but the general idea would be that disagreement would imply disagreement about stance-independent facts in the relevant domain. And disagreements don't necessarily imply stance-independent facts. Think about a disagreement between two cultural relativists. You have Alex and Sam, they're both members of the same culture. Now, cultural relativism holds that moral facts are true or false relative to one's culture. And Alex and Sam are members of the same culture, but they're not really sure what the consensus in their culture is or what the particular cultural perspective of their culture is on a particular matter. So let's say that Alex says abortion is morally wrong, and Sam says, no, abortion is not morally wrong. And both of those claims are true or false relative to their cultural standards, because we're assuming cultural relativism is true and that they're speaking like cultural relativists for the purposes of this illustration. Now, what that means is that when Alex says abortion is morally wrong, I don't remember what order I said it in, doesn't matter. When Alex says abortion is morally wrong, Alex means something like abortion is inconsistent with the moral standards of our culture. And when Sam says, no, it's not morally wrong, Sam means something like, no, abortion is not inconsistent with the standards of our culture. And so they disagree, and there's a fact of the matter. But that fact of the matter is not stance independently true. The fact of that matter is stance dependent. It's dependent on the standards of their culture. So what this shows is that disagreement, and the reality of disagreement, even in the case of there being a fact of the matter, is completely consistent with various conceptions of anti-realism. So merely showing that people engage in disagreement and that those disagreements concern matters of fact is not sufficient to show that people speak, think, or whatever like realists, or to show that realism is true. Arguments from disagreement would have to specifically show that the disagreements concern matters of stance-independent fact. Now, I'll have more to say about it, but that's already one significant shortcoming with this particular point.
What were you doing? Why were you disagreeing? In fact, that doesn't even look like disagreement. Premise 3. Unless we are massively confused about reality and our relationship to it, our social practices at least sometimes indicate some things about reality. We live.
Again, this is very unhelpful because here's the general problem with this. I'm an anti-realist, and I can agree with all of these premises, and I just don't think moral realism would follow from these so far. So I'm an anti-realist. I don't think there's stance-independent moral facts. So I think people disagree about what matters. Absolutely. Do I think disagreement proposes something to disagree over? Usually. I actually think not always. So when you say disagreement presupposes, that's not the same thing as saying entails. So people can disagree and then actually not really have anything that they're disputing or anything like that. I don't know why philosophers seem to think that disagreements in the real world are, always serious or never confused, or they idealize the way that people think about and engage in disputes as though like people, I've had disputes with people where they clarified, I'm like, oh, that's what you meant? Oh, well, never mind. We actually do agree. This does happen. So when you say disagreement presupposes something to disagree over, it might be that interlocutors presume a disagreement even where none exists. That's one possibility. And so it's possible people take themselves to engage in moral disagreement and they don't in fact have a genuine moral disagreement. In some cases, for instance, they could think that they have a disagreement about their moral values when actually they disagree about non-moral facts. And so they reach different moral conclusions because of differences in their non-moral beliefs. I don't want to overcomplicate this too much, but what I think, part of my concern here is that I think this is substantially oversimplifying the nature and complexities of disagreement. I don't think there's just one type of disagreement. I think there's different types of disagreement. Again, I'll get to that as we see this argument unfold, because I think that's the more fatal problem with this. But then if we look at this third premise, unless we're massively confused, our social practices indicate something about reality. Well, of course I agree with that. Why would I disagree with that? But that, like, what it indicates about reality doesn't have to be stance independent moral facts. It could be something like facts about what we're expressing, or facts about what our culture's values are, or facts about our personal preferences, or facts about some constructive set of values that we've implicitly agreed to. There's all sorts of construals that an anti-realist could point to that can make sense of this remark, endorse this remark, and have no problem with it at all. So far, this isn't making a case that's distinctively in favor of moral realism. It might rule out certain really crude and flat-footed and unsophisticated types of relativism, maybe. And I don't even think it's going to handle compelling cases of relativism, like better, stronger cases of relativism. So at best, I think an argument like this is only going to be useful for ruling out really like weak sauce versions of relativism that no philosopher is going to endorse anyway. So if you're trying to make an argument against, like, I don't know, like relativists, like teenage relativists that don't study metaethics, maybe you could rule out those, but like that's not really contending with the serious positions out there.
In reality, we have a pretty good understanding of what's going on in it, unless we're just massively confused. We're systematically deceived about reality, then we at least sometimes get things right about reality. And we're not massively confused about reality. Therefore, premises 1, 2, 3, and 4 entail some things actually do matter.
Oof. Yeah, so that conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. There's also a lot of ambiguity and under specificity. Some things actually do matter. What's meant by actually? Does actually mean stance independently matter? If so, these premises do not entail that conclusion. If it doesn't mean stance independently matter, then the conclusion isn't even a conclusion in favor of moral realism. So you have this ambiguity in the conclusion actually matter. I critique this a lot when philosophers will say, I'm a realist, I think things actually matter. So the implication here is that if you're an anti-realist, you don't think things actually matter. So maybe that means you don't think they matter at all, or you think they matter, but not actually. What the hell? So compare to food, right? I know I give these comparisons a lot, but it's really, really important. So if you're like me, you don't think that there are objective facts, like stance-independent facts about what food is good or bad or tasty or not tasty. In other words, facts about how good or bad food tastes or what you should or shouldn't eat that are true independent of your or anyone else or any conventions or like they're not relative. So one piece of food could taste better than another piece of food, regardless of how it tastes to you or to anyone else. It's sort of intrinsically tasty, independent of the taste reactions you or anyone else has to it. Now, if you're like me, that's silly. That's a ridiculous position, because like what it means for food to be tasty for me just is for it to be tasty to me, or gross to you, or to a group of people, or to people in general. You've got to specify some standard of evaluation. In other words, I treat it in a roughly relativistic sort of way. So I treat food that way. Now, does that mean that I don't think food actually tastes good? If I went to a restaurant and I eat some food and I'm like, look, I find this delicious, but it's not actually delicious, because it's only delicious in a relative sense, not in a stance independent sense. It's only delicious in a stance dependent sense. It's not actually tasty. How ridiculous would you find? Because I find that ridiculous. Would you, if you don't think there's stance independent facts about what music is good or bad, does that mean you don't think music is actually good or bad? This use of actually is a very sneaky term. Moral realists, you got to stop using this. It's super ambiguous, it's super misleading, it's super unhelpful, and it's really easy to show how misguided of a term this is by giving you a reductio with food. If it's not the case that having an anti-realist view of an anti-realist view of food means that you think food doesn't actually taste good or bad, because that's ridiculous. Of course, you could actually think it tastes good or bad in a subjective sense. Then if you're an anti-realist, you could think things actually matter. Actual mattering, on your view, is mattering in the anti-realist sense. And I made this point before, and it's worth stressing again. I don't think anything matters in the sense realists think things matter. I think those views are absurd and totally indefensible. I think things only matter and only could matter in the anti-realist sense. And so the only sense in which I think anything actually matters is the anti-realist sense. So is this an argument for anti-realism? Because I think things only actually matter if they matter in the anti-realist sense, in the stance-dependent sense, which is one way that an anti-realist doesn't have to think things can stance independently. Sorry, an anti-realist does not have to think things stance dependently matter. I think things stance dependently matter. It's consistent with anti-realism. And so that is an anti-realist conception of mattering. I think things only do matter in that respect. And so they only actually matter in the anti-realist respect. But presumably this is not an argument for anti-realism. It's an argument for realism about mattering. And so if it's an argument for realism about mattering, that actually should mean something like stance independent. And if that's the case, those premises do not entail that conclusion. And so this is a very bad argument.
Since we disagree about what matters, and disagreement presupposes the existence of something that matters.
So we disagree about what matters. We disagree about what matters in what respect, in a stance independent respect or a stance dependent respect. So in the first case, we disagree about what matters. If people disagree about if the claim is that people disagree about what stance independently matters, okay, now I don't agree with the claim. I don't agree that people generally disagree about what stance independently matters. Who are we talking about? I understand that moral realists disagree about what stance independently matters, but I don't think that non-philosophers typically disagree about what stance independently matters. Now, if it's the case that if you could establish that people disagreed about what stance independently matters, okay, so then you don't need a lot of the premises in the middle, because you'd be saying something like, people are realists, people aren't confused, and so their realist positions are probably true. It's not a great argument. It's just basically saying, yeah, most people think this way. The way most people think is probably right. And so this position is probably right. So it's not a good argument even on its own terms. But I don't agree with the first premise if it's intended to imply that people think things stance independently matter. And that's just it. You could say, okay, but one of the reasons to think people think things stance independently matter is because they disagree. And that implies that they're disagreeing about matters of stance independent fact. No, it doesn't. I don't think that it does imply that. That's consistent with people disagreeing, but it's also consistent with people disagreeing that they are anti-realist or that they have no determinate meta-ethical position at all. Now, what I kept alluding to, what I wanted to get to before, is that disagreements do not have to be about matters of stance independent fact. I already gave one example of disagreement as a relativist, as a cultural relativist, but note that disagreement, when philosophers talk about disagreement, they present disagreements as though all disagreements have to be disagreements about matters of fact. So the way that they typically frame a disagreement is like, Alex endorses proposition P. Sam endorses proposition not P. And so they each affirm the truth of propositions that are mutually exclusive. They would be contradictory. They can't both be true. That's what a disagreement is. It's when people affirm contradictory propositions. But are all disagreements disputes about the truth of propositions? Well, the answer is no. There's other types of disagreement. And so we need to disambiguate what we take a disagreement to be. Let's say you're on a desert island. You're on one side of the island. Let's say your boat crashes and you and one other survivor each take up residence on different sides of the island. On your side of the island, you have access to all the fresh water. There's running streams, there's fresh water on your side of the island. On the other side of the island, that's where all the coconuts and the fish and the food to sustain yourself are. So you go over and you want to trade, like, hey, I'll give you access to the water. Let me just get access to some of the food. Now, is there a stance independent fact of the matter about the correct exchange rate or the correct resolution to your dispute? Like how much of an exchange you should have? No. You want one thing, they want another thing. Let's say they want, each liter of water, they're only offering 2 fish and you think you should get 3 fish. Well, if that's the case, you have a disagreement about where to meet in the middle, what negotiation solution you both favor. But that disagreement isn't a disagreement about what's true. It's a coordination disagreement. It's a disagreement about what you're both willing to agree to. I can give other examples. I've given them before. You and a group of friends want to order a pizza. Let's say there's 5 of you. One of your friends is vegan. One of your friends hates mushrooms. One of your friends hates tomato sauce. And they want like a pizza with like bechamel or whatever. So you all have disagreements about like a white pizza or whatever. So you have disagreements about what toppings to get, what base to get, what crust to get. One likes thin crust, one's a deep dish crust. You have all these different options, right? Now, is there a fact of the matter about the correct pizza you should order? Let's say you can order or only order one pizza, like one really large pizza. Maybe that's not enough for 5 people. 2 pizzas. Doesn't matter. We don't have to make this realistic. The point here is that if you and a group of friends are trying to order a pizza and you're trying to figure out what toppings to get on the pizza, there's no fact of the matter about the correct choice to get. When you negotiate with one, and you could disagree, like, hey, I want to get mushrooms. No, let's not get mushrooms. And you could argue about it. So you have a disagreement, you have an argument. And if you ask those group of friends, like, hey, do you think there's a sort of stance independent fact of the matter about the correct topping choice to get? And they might go, leave us alone, we're trying to get a pizza, or what the hell are you talking about? But let's just suppose they're all philosophers. My guess is they would say, no, like this isn't a matter of where we're disagreeing about what's true. We're disagreeing about what to do. So at least some disagreements are disagreements about what to do. Now, translate that over to an anti-realist. Let's say you're an anti-realist, another person is an anti-realist. Or we can give a third person example, Alex and Sam. Alex and Sam are both anti-realists, like me. They just don't think they're stance-independent moral facts. Alex is in favor of legal access to abortion. Sam wants to outlaw abortion. So neither of them thinks there's an objective or stance-independent fact of the matter about whether abortion is morally right or wrong. And so neither thinks that it's like true that abortion should be illegal or illegal or regarded as moral or immoral. It's just that Alex thinks it's morally permissible. Sam thinks it's not morally permissible. Do you think that they would go, well, since neither of us thinks that there's a stance-independent fact of the matter, we don't disagree, go about your day? Well, probably not, because they're both, say, part of a democracy. They're both voting, and one's going to vote in favor of legal access, one's going to vote against legal access, and they might get mad at it. Hey, don't vote for that. I want to have legal access to abortion. No, I don't want you to have legal access to abortion. They're going to fight with each other. Why are they fighting with each other? Is it because they disagree about what the objective moral facts are? No, they disagree about what kind of policies they both want to be subject to. One of them wants legal access, one of them doesn't. Let's say a person comes up to you and wants your wallet. You're both moral anti-realists. Give me your wallet. No, I don't want to. Yeah, give it to me. I don't want to. Now, maybe you should be arguing with the person too much if they're threatening your life. But the point here is that when people have disputes, often disputes come down to people wanting to impose their preferences, their values, their standards on other people, or people not agreeing on what outcomes they want to see realized in the world. And in those cases, people will argue. They will negotiate. They will dispute. They will come into conflict with one another, even if the conflict is not a conflict about what's true. So the bottom line here is that disagreement does not require disagreeing about the truth of propositions. You could disagree about what to do. I don't know why has this never occurred to them? What the hell are they talking about? Of course, people can disagree in this respect. And of course, this can undergird an anti-realist perspective on people arguing with one another. People want different outcomes in the world. That doesn't mean they're disagreeing about what's true. This, to me, strikes me as so, like, moral realists love to talk about what's obvious. Look, I'm just going to say, this is completely fucking obvious. So what the hell is wrong with them? I know I get fired up about this, but like, this has got to be in the literature somewhere. If it's not in the literature, I would blow my damn mind. But okay, so let's consider 2 possibilities. This is in the literature. Okay, so why the hell are realists still saying this and presenting these bad arguments? Like if there's an obvious answer out there. If it's not in the literature, oh my God, then that's even worse. They're both bad scenarios. This is not a good argument. Realists shouldn't be making arguments like this. Anti-realists have straightforward, obvious responses to these arguments. Now, if they want to point to specific features of our semantics and say, but look, the structure of the semantics of like a person is trying to say, no, you shouldn't do that because it's wrong. It's true that it's wrong. Like you could point to the language and say that people are using like factive language. They're using language that really looks like they think there's an objective fact of the matter. Again, though, I use language that way. And if you ask me what I mean, I could tell you, and none of it has a damn thing to do with realism. So I just don't buy both the general case that disagreements concern disputes about the truth of propositions. There's obviously disagreements about other sorts of things. And I don't buy these deeper arguments when people start looking more specifically at the language, that the language, you can only make sense of it as a realist. Anti-realists don't really have a problem making sense of this language. I don't think they ever really had a problem making sense of the language. I think that too many of them conceded too much ground to realists because a lot of them, I think, don't take a nuanced perspective on the flexibility, the improvisational nature of language, and how little the way ordinary people speak. And I mean, first of all, a lot of times when philosophers construct artificial sentences, they're really artificial. They're just not like what people are doing in a lot of these cases. And second, when you look at what people are doing in a lot of disputes, you could ask yourself, what goal is this person trying to achieve? Is the person trying to get another person to affirm the truth of a proposition? Maybe, but let's say you asked the proponent of legal access to abortion, hey, do you want that person on the other side of the fence to agree with you that agree with your moral position, but still vote against you? Or do you want them to like vote in favor of you? I think a lot of them would flip it for the latter choice and go, no, like I just want them out of my way. I want my policy to be implemented. They might want a person to agree with them because it would change that person's behavior. My point here is that I think for the most part, people are more concerned about what other people do rather than what they think is true. Now, sometimes they might think, in some cases, it might be a little weird to separate the two. But the point here is that people are, I think, for the most part in these conversations, actually trying to achieve goals or outcomes that have practical consequences in the world. They're not directly and exclusively concerned merely with what like truth value other people assign to propositions, independent of how the truth value they assign to those propositions impacts their behavior or their value or their attitudes. To the extent that they're concerned with the way they assign truth value to propositions, it's because of the impact it has on their actions. And in other words, people's concern about what other people think is true or false typically carries, for the most part, instrumental value. And so when you see people arguing with one another, those arguments are geared towards achieving various socially desirable outcomes. They're trying to achieve their goals. They have a pragmatic objective. And when you view everyday disputes and arguments and discourse in that light, when you're looking at the words people use, you have to look beneath the surface and not focus so much on the syntax as if you could figure out their philosophical views from the structure and the grammar of their language, but try to think about what their philosophical views are from their objectives, from their aims. What are they trying to achieve? And I think that's more revealing. And the thing is about that is a lot of times realists will act like, well, if you're a realist, clearly, and you think abortion should be legal, you have all the motivation in the world to try to argue and dispute and convince anti-abortion people to agree with you because it's true. Like you want them to hold the true views. Okay, well, if you're an anti-realist and you don't want there to be laws against abortion, why the hell wouldn't you want people to do pretty much the same thing, which is stop voting against it? Like the answer is simple. To my mind, you would be doing pretty much the same thing. And so people's actual behavior and practice and the words that they say strike me as equally consistent with both views. And I could tell you what I mean when I use this sort of language. And the thing is, it's not like realists typically went historically out and like with tape recorders and recorded people and did a bunch of archival work and actually cataloged everyday moral discourse. Because I very much doubt a critical examination of actual recordings of everyday moral discourse, it would be like, oh, it's obvious these people are realists. I don't think so. I think it would be very unclear. I think there'd be some realist-ish sounding stuff, some anti-realist-ish sounding stuff. It's probably going to be super variable across context in different languages and different cultures and different societies and different periods of time. It's just going to be a total mess. It's not going to be this clear answer. Oh, yeah, they're clearly realists. And the bottom line is currently the best available empirical evidence just isn't showing when you look at people in different cultures that they reliably and consistently favor realist positions when you explain it to them. Now, is that dispositive that most people are anti-realist? Absolutely not. But what we're not finding is overwhelming evidence that most people, when prompted, favor realist positions. There's just very little indication that that's true. And so I just remain puzzled at arguments like this that seem to presuppose a whole hell of a lot about language and how people think and what people are doing that you could examine empirically, and they're typically not examined empirically. And when you do examine them empirically, because people have, they just don't really support the realist analysis of things. Now, that isn't to say that they support the anti-realist analysis. It's just that realists seem to presume a whole lot and to present their position as some sort of default against which the anti-realist has some sort of burden to argue, when I just don't think they've ever made a strong case for the position in the first case. I think, in other words, it's an extremely presumptuous position. Okay, I said a lot there, so let me pause there and let's take a look at what people have had to say in the comments. Oh, right. Okay, I see one person. Is this a pre-recorded? No, this is not a pre-recording. Look, I'm answering you now. So no, it's not a pre-recording. Oh, right. Okay. Sapir says some things actually do matter. It's as if you only think things do matter when you think that things don't actually matter. See, it's really weird when you put it like that, right? You didn't even say actually in your argument. Yeah, that's true. To be fair, what's being presented here is intended to be simplified. It's not like this is not presented as a super formal syllogism. I mean, it's probably pretty thematic in like what there's probably like a couple premises you'd want to add here if you wanted to formalize it. They're not there. So this is really for ease of exposition. It sounds like there's an audience, and so I don't have a huge problem with the specific wording in general here, but I do have a problem with the use of the term actually. So this is a great point. So I had a whole dang monologue about disagreeing. So the sort of slogan form is I say people don't just disagree about what's true, they disagree about what to do. That's my slogan. They do both, but a lot of disagreements are about what to do. But also, as 21st Century Rambo said, I love that name. Okay, people argue about everything, whether it matters or not. That's the other thing. There are other instances, like I've been with friends where we're arguing about like, yeah, Pulp Fiction is a great movie. No, it's not. Tarantino movies are overrated. Blah blah blah. People will argue about that. I like Pulp Fiction for the record. So people will argue, and in many of these cases, I find it really implausible that those people determinately favor a realist position. Again, I'm not saying they favor an anti-realist position. Keep in mind, I'm an indeterminist about most of this stuff. I don't think non-philosophers are realists or anti-realists about this stuff for the most part. I don't think they have much in the way of specific philosophical views that accord with the views of philosophers. But even setting that issue aside, people will argue for others that, that's a great movie. It's not a great movie. In some cases, people may be appealing to shared intersubjective standards, and so they're actually arguing with respect to the same standards as one another. They may be arguing with implicit commitments to different sets of standards that they're referring to. They're like sort of semi-constructive standards. So someone might be judging a movie in terms of certain sorts of objectively specifiable cinematic qualities, and they could be judging a movie good or bad in terms of those. Another person might be judging a movie with respect to how popular it is or how successful it is. So they could be arguing at cross purposes because they're holding the movie to different standards. Those standards aren't simply an expression of their preferences. And so they might point to features of the movies that support their position, and then they might realize. So you can imagine to me, this movie's great. It's one of the most successful movies of all time. It was a huge box office success. So many people saw it. And the other person goes, yeah, but it has poor cinematography. The dialogue isn't great. It lacks creativity. It's very derivative, and it's like a pastiche of these three other movies. And the other person goes, so who cares if it's a mix of other movies or it took inspiration? Good. It took inspiration from good movies, and it did something new and better, and it appealed to people. The other person might be saying, okay, I'm not just judging the movie in terms of whether it's popular or people enjoyed it. I'm judging it with respect to, is it good art? And then the other person's like, whoa, look, I don't watch movies for art. I watch movies to sit there, eat some popcorn, and have a good time. And the other person might go, oh, well, sure. I can grant it's a fun movie. I enjoyed my popcorn too. I had a great time in the movie. I'm just saying, in terms of its like cinematic qualities, it doesn't have the qualities of this particular director's films. And the other person might go, yeah, that's true, but I don't really care that much at the end of the day. I just love the movie. And they might reach an accord. Now, those people were arguing. Were they at any point committed to there being like cinematic realism? No, they weren't. So people argue all the time. People will argue just to bullshit. They'll argue for fun. Like someone might say, people will argue about what like the best superpower is. Oh, it'd totally be better to be able to teleport. No, because teleporting, because if you teleport, like technically, if you teleported, like you wouldn't even carry your clothes with you, like Huey and the boys, like, and so it's got severe limitations, and like you could teleport inside a wall and get stuck, and then you would die. And, flying is way better because it's more reliable. No, invisibility is better. Okay, but flying, like, people could argue about that. They don't have to think there's an objective fact of the matter. People will raise points and argue. They'll bullshit. A lot of times, bullshitting has all kinds of purposes. Having fun, signaling your intelligence, signaling your creativity, maybe signaling all kinds. In other words, showing or displaying certain qualities that you want to display for other people to assess you or regard you in a particular sort of way, signaling your affiliation with a particular group. A person might say that they like certain kinds of movies to show that they're sophisticated. They might say, "Oh, I hate Nickelback," to show that they're like with the in crowd. I don't get the Nickelback thing. There's some of the songs are not great, but I never really. I don't hate Nickelback. I don't get it. What's one everybody hates now? It's not just Nickelback. Give me another example. I don't know what the hate is about Nickelback. Isn't that in the latest? Which Deadpool movie is that in? I didn't see the latest Deadpool movie, but I think there's like a Nickelback dispute at some point. I don't know. But you get the idea. So people will argue whether or not it matters to them. So Predator Crush says the realist seems to be presupposing what matters has truth correspondence and stance independent sense. Yeah, exactly. That seems to be an issue here. All right. Have you read Michael Gill's? Okay. More references to Michael Gill. Have you read Michael Gill's History of Ethics work? I found him through his work on sentimentalism. I haven't. I have only really read a few Gill papers, which are the ones on indeterminacy and variability. He has a great one that lays out the position, and then he has another one that's part of a dialogue or exchange. I think it involves Don Loeb, Walterson, and Armstrong. I think there's a couple other people involved in that discussion. It's something incoherence and error. He has a couple other papers where he fleshes that out a bit. He does make some references to the history of 20th century meta-ethics, but I haven't read a lot of his work on the history of ethics. I would be very interested. I used to not care as much, but a friend of mine, a pragmatist friend of mine, has cued me into the fact that there are philosophers, especially ones that I'm finding in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that have been forgotten by history and that were really, really great. And it's given me a sense that maybe there's more that I'm not aware of in the recent history of meta-ethics that I should be aware of. I'd really love to see what the heck people were saying to G.E. Moore around the turn of the 20th century with Principia Ethica and all that stuff. Give me one. Oh, sorry, it's muted. Yeah, 1903 is when Principia Ethica came out. And I just don't know much about, like, I can't name any other meta-ethicists from 1903. I can't name any. Like, the next ones I could think of are Mackey, Ayer, R.M. Hare, and looks like at least a few decades later in Mackey, and like comes way later. So like what was going on in the, I don't know. So yeah, it'd be really, yeah. Okay, here's a great example: Goku versus Superman, and then you got like One Punch Man versus various people. Let's see what else we got. Sapir says, are they implying that social practices can't be part of reality unless they somehow point to something stance independent? It does look like they're implying that, which I find really weird, because people can have disputes about constructed matters of fact. People can have serious disputes about like what's true in the Harry Potter universe. So I don't, like, people argue about with Tolkien, and some of them are right or wrong about, like, I don't know who forged the first rings or whatever. I don't know enough about Tolkien, so I don't know why I brought that example up. All right, let's see what else. Like, Mariana says, I have a very controversial opinion that Empire Strikes Back is the worst Star Wars film. That's strange. Okay. I'm not a big Star Wars person, but that seems like an unusual position. Maybe you should go on a channel and talk about that. I'm sure that would get a lot of people worked up. All right. Let's keep going. And I'll probably have to take a break real quick. And, it's not that late. I can keep going.
And we are not massively confused in our social practices. That shows that at least some things do, in fact, matter. Now, is it impossible that we are wrong about everything? No. That's why
this is strange. Like, is it impossible that we're wrong? No. It's like he's so confident that people couldn't just be confused. And like, yeah, it's possible that we're not all confused. What? People have been all confused about all sorts of things all through history. So framing it this way gives the impression that more work has been done than in fact has been done. And that it's especially, there's something that is egregious and really implausible about thinking everyone would be subject to a particular kind of error. But I see no issue with that. Most people are theists. I think they're probably mistaken about that. Most people, if you give them like basic, like the bat and the ball question, most people get it wrong. People are frequently mistaken about all sorts of stuff. So why would it come as a huge surprise that people were implicitly committed to a false philosophical theory? There's nothing especially implausible about that at all.
I've said that moral realism is almost certainly true. But notice how far into the realm of the bizarre you have to go in order to get out of this argument. You have to say that we are massively confused every time we disagree with somebody. Not
Wait, every time we disagree with somebody? No. He hasn't done the work to show that that would be the case if you're an anti-realist about morality. That's not true. That hasn't been shown.
Not just in terms of which person is right, but in terms of whether disagreement is a possible social activity at all.
Look, the bottom line is people can disagree.
Let's look at the next one. The positive.
People can disagree about non-moral issues. People disagree about issues about which there's no stance independent fact of the matter. The claim there is way too strong for the evidence that's been presented.
Argument from moral belief about moral realism. We have beliefs about what matters. To believe that something matters is to believe that it actually matters. That's just what beliefs are. Imagine me saying, I believe that my students matter, but I don't believe that they actually matter. What? What am I talking about?
Yeah, what is he talking about? To believe something matters is to believe it actually matters. What does he mean by actually?
Or, I believe that it's raining outside, but I don't think that it's actually raining. Or, I believe that it's Wednesday, but I don't think that it's actually Wednesday. You would think, again, I don't think Andrew knows what the word believe means.
I believe that vanilla ice cream is tasty, but I don't believe it's actually tasty. That does sound weird, right? So I would say, no, yeah, I believe it's tasty, and I believe it's actually tasty. But by actually tasty, I don't mean stance independently tasty. So the problem here is that if actually here means stance independent, this does not follow, because people can have beliefs without thinking those beliefs necessarily reflect stance independent truths. If it does not mean stance independently, then it's not going to be able to be leveraged as an argument to support realism. So this is lose-lose for him already. Either actually means stance independent, in which case 2 is false, or it doesn't, in which case realism is not going to follow from this. This is not going to go anywhere good.
Because to believe is to believe that actually. And so if you believe that something matters, you believe that it actually matters.
Why doesn't he explain what he means by actually here? Now, I did skip an early portion of the video, so I'm going to go back and see if he addresses that, because it's in the first minute. Let's do that. So as you can see here, he addresses this question, what is mattering? And maybe I should have covered this. I try to save time by not covering every second of a video. But maybe at this point, this is a good point to address it anyway. Let's have a look at what's said here.
What matters is what matters, period. Not what matters to you or to her or to them or to us.
Bingo. It's what matters. Notice the parentheses, what matters objectively. So if he's using the term matters to mean objectively matters, then what is added by saying if you think something matters, you think it actually matters? So if matters, on his view, the way he's using the term already means objectively, in other words, stance independently matters, then what is he saying if he says if you think something stance independently, like let's substitute matters for stance independently matters. If you think something stance independently matters, then you think it actually stance independently matters. What work is actually doing? Is actually doing any work at all, or is it not doing anything? Because if actually was supposed to mean stance independently, then he's saying something, it basically actually isn't adding anything. It's like saying, if you think things stance independently matter, then you think things stance independently matter. What? So I don't know what work actually is supposed to be doing.
So to this specific group or that specific group, when you're talking about what matters to you or to somebody else, you're talking about your mental state, your beliefs about what matters, or your likes. And those things are really important. They're just not what we're talking about here. When I say that moral realism...
Okay, so let's get back to where we were. So his use of actually here, it looks to be, there's a few possibilities. One is he's not presupposing stance independence throughout those remarks. That would be really weird because he says at the start of this talk, when he says matters, he means objectively matters. Objectively usually means more or less what's meant by stance independent. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to presume that that's what's meant. In which case the use of matter already implicitly presupposes stance independent. In that case, if we go back to the first positive argument, we disagree about what matters. That seems to be suggesting we disagree about what stance independently matters, in which case I reject the first premise. You could see my dissertation. You could see my other work on this with David Moss, my colleague. I argue that the available empirical evidence does not support the conclusion that most people endorse moral realism. And so I don't generally think it's the case that, because he says we, but who the heck is we? I don't think people generally disagree about what stance independently or objectively matters. So I would just reject the first premise. You could probably restructure this argument in some way, but I'm going to get off the boat immediately. So let's go to the next one, where we were at. And this is where the problems start. We have beliefs about what stance independently matters. Again, who is we? I don't have beliefs about what stance independently matters. Who has these beliefs? So if we say to believe that X stance independently matters is to believe that X actually stance independently matters, what the heck work is actually doing? So Pierre says here, it's empty emphasis. Yeah, so sometimes when people say actually, they do use it for emphasis. So someone would say, are you going? Yes, I'm actually going. You're finally going. Yeah, I'm actually going. I'm really going. So sometimes people use actually really as a form of emphasis, and that's just a natural part of language, but it's not, that type of emphasis doesn't do any significant philosophical lifting. So it shouldn't be in a premise of a philosophical argument. Its meaning there is unclear. This is, I'm very sorry, but this is not good philosophical work here. This use of actually, this is sloppy, and I'm not sure what it achieves. Just be blunt. Other than to confuse audiences, this is actively misleading. This is not good.
That something matters, you believe that it actually matters. Now, unless we are massively confused again, the objects of our beliefs, the things we believe stuff about, at least sometimes exist.
Again, unless we're massively, yeah. Look, again, most people believe in God. If you're an atheist, then you think most people are mistaken about that. It's possible for most people to be confused. It's not just that it's possible, it's completely plausible. And again, if you're a theist, just pick some other thing that lots of people believe, astrology, whatever it is that you think is, some, superstitious belief. Probably most people, you could find at least one belief that they're massively confused about. And if we're talking not even just mistaken, but just confused, has this I don't know about you. I talk to a lot of people. Most people are massively confused. There's lots of things I'm massively confused about. I'm massively confused about, I don't know, the U.S. tax system. It's really confusing. So maybe massively confused here means something like subject to surprising amounts of error. Again, there's a lack of specificity and clarity about what's meant by these claims, because confused doesn't necessarily mean wrong. And I think this is not going to work well if it just means confused in a general sense. That's not necessarily indicating having false beliefs. So this could do with a bit of cleaning up, even if it's intended for a general audience. But the argument here is just really weak. It's something like again, if you substitute out hey, most people think moral realism is true. And unless people are really confused, then since they have beliefs about what's objectively right or wrong, unless they're really confused, those beliefs, beliefs like that, like realist beliefs, are at least sometimes true. or some of the like this is a little ambiguous. Man, this is ambiguous in so many ways. The objects of our beliefs at least sometimes exist like within domain or across domain. So if I have a bunch of beliefs about what God wants, would we say, given that I have thousands of beliefs about God's beliefs, attitudes, desires, actions, blah, 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 that at least some of the beliefs are true? Because if even one of them is true, it implies God exists. So I have lots of moral beliefs. If I have at least beliefs about what stands independently right or wrong, would we say at least one of the beliefs is probably true? No, because we're actually judging between domains or categories, not within the categories. So it could be that all of your judgments about what's morally right or wrong from like stance independently are misguided, and all of your judgments about God say are true because God does exist. So you can't just win by saying, hey, this person with superstitious beliefs, they have thousands of superstitious beliefs. Surely one of them is correct. That's not going to fly. So again, there's underspecificity here with about our beliefs. Unless we're massively confused, the objects of our beliefs at least sometimes exist. And no, at least sometimes exist means people, the objects people believe exist, there's at least one of them, probably. Or maybe this even, at least one of the beliefs people have about what exists. Okay, yeah, people believe in trees, those exist. So it's so modest, I don't see what substantive philosophical work it's going to do. In other words, this is not really like, unless people are so confused or wrong about everything, they're right about at least something. That seems to be what this is saying, which strikes me as trivial. It's like saying, unless we're wrong about everything, we're not wrong about everything. Oh, okay, sure, that's trivially true.
Unless you were massively confused, you would at least sometimes be thinking about things that do exist. Maybe you'd be thinking false things about those things, but you would at least be thinking about things that actually exist. So I have beliefs about what day it is. I have beliefs about my students. I have beliefs about where I live and who my parents are and what foods I like and what 2 + 2 equals.
I see. So it's not necessarily beliefs that are true. It's just that the things that you have beliefs about, like those things exist, even if your beliefs about them are false. So you at least like correct that like your parents exist and trees exist and the sun exists, even if you think the sun is like really close to us, or you think trees are mystic beings. So you're wrong about that, but you're at least right that they exist. I think that's what's being said here.
I have all of those beliefs. In order for the number 4 and my parents and the place that I live and days of the week not to exist, I would have to be very confused about pretty much everything that I was up to. But I'm not very confused about pretty much everything that I'm up to, and neither are you. Therefore, some things actually do matter. Now, again, you can wiggle out of.
Whoa. What? Hold up. One, we have beliefs about what stands independently matters. To believe that something stands independently matters is to believe that it actually stands independently matters. I have no idea what that means. Unless we're massively confused, the objects of our belief at least sometimes exist, and we're not massively confused. 5 just doesn't follow from that. Yeah, okay, so let's say we grant, unless we're massively confused, and let's say we're not massively confused. So the objects of our beliefs at least sometimes exist. That doesn't mean the objects of our beliefs about what stands independently matters at least sometimes exist. He hasn't shown that, and none of the premises here entail that. So the conclusion simply does not follow. Just doesn't follow. Okay, that conclusion doesn't follow for the premises, just straightforwardly. That's not a good argument.
This, but you have to go really far into the realm of the bizarre and say, we are confused about almost everything. And notice that that's not just something that you can do.
No, that doesn't follow. You could think people are not confused about most things, but they are confused about things stands independently mattering. See, because you could grant 3 and 4. You could say, hey, so imagine a person thinks this. I don't think people are massively confused about everything. I think people are not confused about most things. I think people generally have a good sense of what the world is like. They're right that physical objects exist. They're right that minds exist. They're right that they have experiences. They're right that their sensory experiences are generally accurate. Their scientific models of the world are generally accurate. They're right about most things. They're not confused about most things. But when it comes to the matter of stance-independent moral facts, They're wrong. They believe that, but they're wrong about it. That's not massive confusion. That's local massive confusion. It depends what you mean by massive confusion. It's local, that they're really wrong about one category of things. But no, the first two premises are about moral realism, because it's like, hey, we have beliefs about what the stance independent facts are. And, to believe that means that we think they actually are, whatever that means. But then the third premise shifts towards, it's not even talking specifically about realism or things mattering in the stance independent respect. It's just talking about people's general beliefs. So generally speaking, unless we're massively confused, the things that we believe exist do exist. Like the objects about which we have beliefs, those things exist, even if our beliefs about them are false. And then we're not massively confused. So we should accept then the objects of our beliefs at least sometimes exist. Let's say we grant that. The objects of our beliefs at least sometimes exist. That does not show that the objects of our beliefs about what stands independently matters exist. That does not follow. Just doesn't follow. It's just a straight up non sequitur. That's really weird. Yeah, so Tony D3. Yeah, you're right. I think you could probably do a parody argument of this. So you could say stuff like, we have beliefs about what our astrological signs say about our personalities. To believe that astrological signs about our personalities are like that they tell us something informative is to believe that they actually tell us something informative. Unless we're massively confused, the objects of our beliefs at least sometimes exist, and we're not massively confused. Therefore, our astrological signs do tell us something about our personalities. Like you could just swap out the terms for something goofy like that, and the argument like works, which of course shows that it doesn't work. Because you could use it to reach pretty silly conclusions. Yeah, this is not great. Okay, I'm gonna take a little break there. I'll be back in about 2-3 minutes. I'm just gonna fill up my drink and run to the restroom real quick and do all that stuff. So throw me some questions in the comments, do all that stuff, and I will be right back in a minute. All right, I am back. So this comment, this guy's channel is actually pretty good. This video is an exception to the rule in being bad. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people I think make some mistakes when covering meta ethics, but they otherwise do fantastic work. Not knocking anything else this person has done. How often does Lance stream, and where can I find a schedule? I don't have a schedule. So as I said at the beginning of the stream, I don't know if you joined later. I just started a new job, and I am adjusting to a very different schedule. I'm getting up early, which is weird because I'm now it's approaching pretty late, and I have not even had dinner yet. So I'm I'm not going to be around too much longer. I don't think I'm going to finish the video, which means I'll probably do a second stream this week just to get it out of the way, and then do another one next week. Let's do 2 streams a week. And I still got the TikTok videos from a few months. It's like March now that I did them to upload, so you can see those. But yeah, sorry, the short answer is I don't have a schedule right now. I'm doing this on Monday and then random days during the week. I do have another event tomorrow. So if I stream again this week, then that means 3 videos in 1 week. So you're getting lots of content. So let's keep going. Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Yep. Okay. So let's do another, I'm at an hour and a half. That's actually a pretty good place to wrap up. I kind of want to do more, but I think this is a comfortable place to wrap up. I know I left and then came back, but an hour and a half is a good place to stop. So let's close out the video. Sorry, I'll stop sharing and I'll just talk to y'all. So any other questions, comments, things to go over, then we could do that. The lighting in here is weird. I'm gonna have to figure that out. I'm now seeing that my lighting is not great. So I'll have to get that sorted too. And I'll eventually have a good setup for everything here. So yeah, what else can I say? So my blog just hit 400 subscribers. If you're not over there, I do in the link to this video, you'll see this thing. So I say here, to see my blog, follow me on TikTok, all that stuff. You'll see a link tree. And so if you go to that link tree, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff. So go check out the link tree. Let me see what's on there. So I got the first link that comes up is the YouTube channel itself. So my YouTube links to my YouTube. But you see, I got a TikTok. I do have some older videos that I posted back at the start of the year. So 8, 9 months ago now. So I did a few recorded videos there, short videos. I'm going to get back to that at some point. Just as you can imagine, life got really, really wild. So, because of the move, I had to sell my house. We had to do repairs. We had to do a whole bunch of stuff. And I don't handle moving very well. It takes me a long time to get set up and positioned in a new home. I am very picky about my setup and the way things are. So I'm not, you could see I'm like sitting near my kitchen right now. It's not really where I want to be. So eventually I'll have a better setup. Eventually, hopefully I'll have like a green screen and like some kind of studio or something like that. We'll see. With the new job, hopefully, I'll eventually be in a position to start getting new equipment, better microphone, stuff like that. I'd like to do that. Better webcam, that'd be cool. I think this one is like 720 or something. So got to do that. So there's going to be changes. What else was I talking about? Oh, right. So if you go there, what else we got on the link tree? I got my blog on there. So the blog only has 400 subscribers. I've been at it for 2 years now, and I got over 200 posts. And I have been thinking, what specific factors are prompting the lack of growth? Personally, I do think it's primarily the topics I cover. I think it's too niche. It's too like, hey, here's 17 things wrong with this person's argument, kind of like what I do in this channel. And I just do that. There are other things on there. There's a little bit of news. I have a link post on there. I should do this more consistently. I'd like eventually to cover more like meta-ethics news, like what's going on in the world of meta-ethics and experimental philosophy. And I have a few articles in psychology on there, not as many as I should. So there's a bit of diversity on there, and the diversity is slowly increasing in frequency. So there's that. But yeah, I don't know what it is. So I'm trying to get, I'm not here to add, because a lot of you are probably already subscribed, or if you like YouTube, you might not be into blogging stuff. I am using Notes over there. If you don't know what Notes is, Substack started this. So Substack is like a big blog network. It seems to be blowing up, like everybody's using it. Notes is a little bit like Twitter, but so far it's mostly people that I want to talk to there, or I don't mind seeing their notes at least. So that's pretty cool. I like the interface. It's pretty good. So I'm using that more. And so you can pop over there if you like text discussions. I used to argue a lot more on Facebook, but it seems to be dying a very slow death over on Facebook. So I'm still there on occasion. Where else? That's about it for me. I've used Blue Sky, but not a lot of people seem to be on there. So yeah, the channel seems to be, let's see where I'm at as far as I passed 1,500 subscribers. I wanted to hit 2,000 by the end of the year, and I don't think it's going to happen. Probably because I took that big summer hiatus. 1.52. Not bad, not bad. It's not bad, but it's a lot bigger than the blog. So I don't know. I don't know what to do to get the blog out there. There's a lot of good blogs on there. There's new ones every day. So even if you don't like my blog, check out the other blogs there. In fact, I recommend a bunch of blogs, and it's not a bunch of meta ethics stuff. I promise. I don't even know if there's. I think I might. Is there any other blog that's just meta ethics, or is mine like literally the only one? There's got to be others, but I don't even know about them. There's ones on normative ethics. There's ones that cover a bunch of topics. I gotta. It's too narrow. I'm just too narrow in my interests. Let's see. Have you thought of checking out reviewing Emerson Green's content regarding metaethics? Yeah, I have, and that's not a bad idea. Does Emerson have stuff that's like not an interview with Michael Huemer or anything like that, where Emerson just talks about his own views? Because yeah, I'd be happy to review those. Metaphysical perspective. Yeah, I don't like metaphysics. So I'm a pragmatist. I think I'm a classical pragmatist, or at least an aspiring classical pragmatist. I haven't consumed enough pragmatism to really get a sense of exactly where someone like James or Schiller are coming from, but I'm learning more with time. But I've always had those sort of inclinations in some underdeveloped way, and I generally am very wary of metaphysical disputes of almost any kind. I don't tend to call myself a naturalist or a physicalist. I would prefer to call myself an empiricist. If I'm allowed to be super pedantic and picky about those terms, I might ascribe to them, but I don't generally like those terms. I prefer the term empiricist. So you could see that I'm eschewing specific metaphysical positions in lieu of a broader metaphilosophical and perhaps epistemic approach to framing things. I prefer not to take substantive metaphysical stances on pretty much anything. So I talk about things existing. I say things are true, but I don't endorse truth correspondence. I like a correspondence theory of truth. And I don't generally endorse a lot of the more substantive metaphysical claims people endorse. All right. So, and that's something I'll eventually have to say more about. I feel like I need to understand topics better before I start talking about them. I'm not going to get up here and talk about pragmatism when there's people that know that, understand it orders of magnitude better than I do. So give it some time. I'm reading about and dipping into new areas. I'm not just reading that ethics. So eventually I'll get there. I really got to get through this adjustment period and start feeling like this is home and this is comfortable. That's going to help a lot. All right. I think that's a decent place to wrap up. I'll work on the lighting issues. I'll test this on my own. At least we got that freezing issue over. You remember on the channel that things used to freeze up constantly? The freezing is over. Yes, that's amazing. So that's resolved. I think next I'll probably shoot for getting a better camera, but my connectivity and freezing issues seem to be out of the way. That's cool. Okay. So I have a video. Maybe I'll link it in the what's it called, community section, the place I'm going to be tomorrow. In fact, let me do that now. I'm not going to waste all your time because people are going to be listening to this. So I'll do it after the video. Okay, so that's it for today. I will see you all. I'll again check the community section here because I'm going to have a link to a place I'm going to be tomorrow. I think I'm reviewing another discussion of metaethics with Alex O'Connor and I forget something Biddle, I think. So yeah, Alex has really been out there doing a lot of really high profile events. So that should be interesting. So I'll be doing that one tomorrow. So go check that out. And we'll see if I have time for things later in the week. So the semester here just started. Things are real busy, but this is, I used to get a little nervous, like right before things started. I'm like, I'm gonna mess things up. I've stopped videos and like restarted because I goof things up. I start stumbling over my words and stuff. It doesn't seem to be happening anymore. I'm finally getting comfortable with stuff. So anyway, have a good night. See you all later in the week. Take care. Oh, and like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave comments, and do all the things. Get this stuff out there. See you all later.